The evening sun cast long golden fingers through the windows of their cozy living room, catching dust motes dancing in the air. It was a scene of perfect peace, one that belied the storm raging silently in Adela's heart. She sat on the plush rug, her back against the sofa, a well-worn medical journal open but unread on her lap. Her gaze was fixed on a photograph on the mantelpiece, their wedding day. Lucas's smile was so bright, so full of a future they had taken for granted. "Hey!" His voice, still so gentle, came from the doorway. He crossed the room and sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. She melted into his embrace, the familiar scent of him a temporary balm. "You're thinking about it again." A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "Mrs. Alibi at the supermarket today? Her daughter just had twins. She asked when we would make her happy." Her voice was a broken whisper. "It's everywhere, Lucas. Everywhere I look." Lucas cupped her face, his thumb wiping the tear away. His eyes, deep and earnest, held onto hers. "Adela, look at me. It is God that gives children. In his right time, he will bless us. Not Mrs. Alibi's time. Not my mother's time. His." He kissed her forehead. "We are a family, you and I. That is enough for me." It was a mantra he had repeated for 5 years. A mantra she had clung to until its edges were frayed and thin. But his faith was a fortress, and she lived in its shadow. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt like an intrusion. Lucas squeezed her shoulder and went to answer it. Adela heard the familiar, booming voice of their friend, Henry. "Brother Lucas, and how is my favorite family today?" Henry strode in, his presence immediately filling the room. He was Lucas's oldest friend, a constant, cheerful pillar in their lives. Unmarried, he often joked he was still searching for a woman who could tolerate my jokes. "We are managing, Henry. We are managing," Lucas said, clapping him on the back. Henry's keen eyes fell on Adela. He saw the faint trace of tears and the forced smile. He didn't mention it, instead launching into a funny story about a chaotic client at his architecture firm, successfully making Adela laugh. A real, genuine laugh that made Lucas's shoulders relax. Later, as Henry was leaving, he pulled Lucas aside slightly. "How is she, truly?" he asked, his voice low. "The pressure is getting harder to bear," Lucas admitted, running a hand over his face. "But we will be fine. God is in control." Henry nodded, a supportive hand on his friend's arm. "He is, brother. Everything will be fine. Just keep loving her. That's what she needs most." The peace, however, was fragile. It shattered the very next day with a phone call. Lucas's mother was coming for a visit, and she was bringing luggage. Mama Naka's arrival was like a cold front sweeping into their warm home. She filled the space not with laughter, but with silent, disapproving scrutiny. Her eyes, sharp as flint, missed nothing. The absence of childish toys, the 2 clean walls, the profound quiet. That first evening, as Adela served dinner, Mama Naka's voice cut through the clatter of cutlery. "This soup is good, Adela. It's a pity there are no grandchildren here to enjoy their grandmother's cooking." She looked directly at her son. "A man's legacy is his children. What will you leave behind, Lucas? This house? A car?" Adela's hand froze, the serving spoon hovering midair. Lucas cleared his throat. "Mama, please, we are trusting God." "God helps those who help themselves," she retorted. "How long will you trust God while your wife remains a desert?" The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Barren. Adela felt it like a physical blow. She excused herself and fled to the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her breath coming in short gasps. The hope Lucas always offered felt thin, insubstantial against the brutal weight of that word. The days of the visit bled into one another, a slow torture. Mama Naka's comments were constant, a dripping tap, eroding stone. She criticized Adela's cooking, her cleaning, the way she looked. No wonder you can't conceive, she'd mutter just loud enough to be heard. You are too thin, stressed, useless. Lucas at first would offer weak defenses. Mama, that's enough. But his mother was a master manipulator. When Adela was out of earshot, she would work on him. Look at you, my son. You are aging with stress. Uchena's son, the one who married after you, his third child, is taking his first steps. Your father cries in his grave. This woman has tied a curse around your neck. You must free yourself. Divorce her. Find a real woman who can give you a child. Slowly, insidiously, the poison seeped in. Adela began to notice the change. The comforting arm around her shoulder was slower to come. His prayers before bed became rushed, then ceased altogether. The light in his eyes when he looked at her was dimming, replaced by a weary resignation. One night, as they lay in bed, a chasm of silence between them, Adela gathered her courage. She turned to him, her voice small in the dark. Lucas, what is happening? You're different. You've been so distant since your mother came. He was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound of profound irritation. Adela, not everything is about you. I have a lot on my mind. The pressure from work, from family. Must you always be so sensitive? You're overthinking. You're always the victim, aren't you? The words were like ice water. He had never spoken to her like that. The fortress of his love, which had protected her for so long, had its first, visible, terrifying crack. The change in Lucas became a chilling new normal. His warmth was replaced by a constant, simmering irritation. A cup left on the table, a question about his day, the sound of Adela crying softly in the bathroom. Everything was a trigger. He spent more time on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, a faint, unfamiliar smile sometimes playing on his lips. Henry noticed it immediately during his next visit. He found Adela in the kitchen, her movements slow, her eyes red-rimmed as she prepared a meal she knew Lucas would barely touch. In the living room, Lucas was barking into his phone about a delayed report. Is everything all right? Henry asked quietly, leaning against the kitchen doorway. Adela just shook her head, a fresh wave of tears threatening to fall. I don't know who he is anymore, Henry. Later, Henry cornered Lucas in the study. Lucas, what is going on with you? I just saw Adela in the kitchen. She looks broken. And the way you spoke to her earlier about the salt in the soup? That wasn't you, brother. Lucas didn't look up from his laptop. Henry, don't start. I have enough on my plate. This is important, Henry insisted, his voice firm. That is your wife. The woman you vowed to love and protect. This isn't protection, Lucas. This is destruction. Lucas slammed his laptop shut, his chair screeching as he stood up. The cordial mask he wore for the world was gone, replaced by a raw, ugly anger. Don't you dare stand there and teach me how to treat my wife, he snarled, his voice low and venomous. When you yourself cannot even find a woman to marry you, what do you know about the pressures of building a family, huh? Stay out of my marriage. The words hung in the air, a brutal dismissal of their years of friendship. Henry took a step back, the hurt clear in his eyes. He looked at Lucas, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger consumed by bitterness. He nodded slowly, a deep sadness settling on his features. As you wish, brother, he said quietly, and turned to leave, the chasm between them now wide and unbridgeable. With Henry's voice of reason silenced, Lucas's descent accelerated. The secret phone calls became longer. He started coming home late, smelling of a cheap floral perfume that was not Adela's. He invented business trips, his lies clumsy and transparent. The end came on a rainy Tuesday. Adela, trying to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, decided to do a load of laundry. As she emptied the pockets of Lucas's trousers, her fingers closed around a crumpled receipt. It was from an expensive hotel, dated for a night he had claimed to be working late. Paperclipped to it was a handwritten note on pink scented paper. Last night was magical. Can't wait to see you again, my handsome Lucas. Love, Brenda. The world tilted. The receipt fluttered from her numb fingers. The evidence was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical, scented reality. The fortress was not just cracked, it lay in ruins around her. When Lucas returned that evening, the house was dark and silent. He found her sitting on the edge of the bed, the receipt and the note placed neatly on the duvet between them. Her face was not contorted in rage, but was a blank, terrifying mask of utter devastation. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't fall to his knees. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, a strange mix of defiance and relief on his face. Adela, he began, but no excuse followed. Get out, she whispered, her voice hoarse. This is my house, Claude, he said, a final weak assertion of control. Then I will leave, she said, standing up. Her movements were mechanical, devoid of emotion. She pulled a small suitcase from the closet and began to pack. She took only her clothes, the photo from their wedding day, and the little savings she had tucked away from her freelance tailoring. Lucas watched her, a part of him screaming to stop her, to beg for forgiveness. But the voice of his mother was louder. She is a curse. Free yourself. He remained silent as she zipped the bag. Adela walked out of the bedroom, past the man who was no longer her husband, and out of the front door. She didn't look back. The rain had softened to a drizzle. She walked aimlessly for blocks, the cold seeping through her clothes, the reality of her situation crashing down. She was an orphan. She had no family to run to. Her friends were mutual friends. She couldn't face the pitying looks. There was only one person who had seen the truth and had tried to help. It was late when she stood before Henry's apartment door, drenched and shivering, her small suitcase at her feet. She raised a trembling hand and rang the bell. The door opened. Henry stood there, dressed in a t-shirt and pajama pants, his face a canvas of shock and concern. Adela? My God, what happened? Are you okay? The simple kindness in his voice broke her. The dam holding back her tears burst. Sobs racked her body and she could barely stand. Henry didn't ask another question. He simply opened his arms. She stumbled into his embrace, and he held her tightly as she cried, her tears soaking his shirt. He guided her inside, out of the cold and the dark. You're safe here, Adela, he murmured, leading her to a sofa. You're safe. You can stay as long as you need. In that moment, it was the only anchor she had in a world that had completely fallen apart. The days turned into weeks, and a new, fragile rhythm established itself in Henry's apartment. The initial, raw grief slowly gave way to a numb exhaustion. Henry was a perfect gentleman, giving her space while providing unwavering support. He converted his study into a temporary bedroom for her, cooked her meals, and simply sat with her in comfortable silence when the weight of her sorrow was too heavy for words. Lucas, engulfed in the selfish thrill of his new freedom and the flattery from Brenda, made no attempt to contact her. His silence was more painful than any angry word could have been. It was a confirmation that she had been easily erased, that their years together meant nothing. This final abandonment, however, became the catalyst for her healing. The woman who had been broken began to gather her pieces, slowly, painstakingly. One evening, as they washed dishes together after a quiet dinner, Henry broke the comfortable silence. His voice was soft but firm. Adela, there's something I need to say. I've felt this way for a long time, but I never, ever would have acted on it. You were my best friend's wife. He paused, putting down a plate and turning to look at her. But you are not just that anymore. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and I have fallen in love with you. Completely. Adela's hand stilled in the soapy water. She looked at him, seeing the earnest affection in his eyes, and fear clenched her heart. Henry, I I can't go through that again. I'm broken. I'm still the same woman who couldn't give Lucas a child. What if what if you change your mind too? Henry reached out, taking her wet, soapy hands in his. His grip was warm and sure. Look at me, Adela. With or without children, I will always love you. I am not Lucas. I am choosing you, just you. Everything else is a blessing, but you are the miracle. His words were a balm on a wound she thought would never heal. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were tears of release, of a terrifying, hopeful new beginning. Their love story started not with a dramatic passion, but with a profound, healing gentleness. They were married in a small, simple ceremony 3 months later, with a few close friends as witnesses. It was a celebration not of grandeur, but of a second chance at happiness. Meanwhile, Lucas's new life quickly curdled. The glamour of the affair faded, and Brenda's true nature emerged, demanding, manipulative, and careless. A routine health checkup, prompted by a persistent fever and fatigue, delivered a verdict that shattered his world. The doctor's words, "Your test results have come back positive for HIV," echoed in the sterile room, a life sentence. The news plunged him into a deep, dark depression. Brenda vanished the moment he confronted her, leaving only a trail of lies. The party was over, and the hangover was a living nightmare. Lying alone in his cold, empty bed, the ghost of Adela's love haunted him. Regret, sharp and acidic, filled him. He had traded a diamond for glittering trash, and it had cost him his health and his soul. He had to find Adela. He had to beg for her forgiveness. It was his only path to redemption. It took him another month to gather the courage and track her down. The information, when it came, was a second, more brutal blow. "She's married," a mutual friend told him hesitantly. "To Henry." The name was a physical punch to his gut. Henry, his friend, the one he had scorned. A volcanic mix of bitterness, jealousy, and self-loathing erupted within him. He drove to the address he was given, a beautiful bungalow in a serene neighborhood, a far cry from the apartment Henry used to have. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stood at the gate, his body thinner, his eyes shadowed by illness and regret. He pressed the bell, his hand trembling. The door opened, and there stood Henry, looking more content and solid than Lucas had ever seen him. "Lucas," Henry said, his voice flat, devoid of its former warmth. He didn't seem surprised. Before Lucas could stammer out his rehearsed plea, a figure moved behind Henry. Adela came to stand beside her husband, one hand instinctively moving to rest on the distinct, gentle curve of her pregnant belly. Time stopped. Lucas's eyes widened, his jaw went slack. He stared, first at her face, which was no longer drawn with sorrow, but glowed with a serene happiness, then down to the undeniable proof of her fertility. The world narrowed to that single, devastating image. His former wife, cradling the child he had so desperately wanted, protected by the man he had driven away. The air was sucked from his lungs. He couldn't speak, couldn't think. The carefully constructed wall of his bitterness crumbled into dust, leaving only the raw, gaping wound of his catastrophic mistake. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Lucas stood frozen on the doorstep, a specter of his own ruined past. He tried to form words, an apology, a curse, a plea, but his throat was sealed shut by the sheer, ironic magnitude of his loss. Adela looked at him, and in her eyes he found no hatred, no gloating victory. Instead, he saw a profound, unsettling pity. It was a look that stripped him bare more effectively than any anger could. She was no longer the woman he had broken. She was whole, complete, and utterly beyond his reach. Her hand gently stroked her belly, a protective, loving gesture meant for the life within her, but it felt like a verdict passed on him. She took a soft breath, her gaze steady on his shattered form. "God's time is always perfect, Lucas," she said, her voice quiet yet clear. carrying the weight of their shared and severed history. It's just that she paused, her words falling with the gentle finality of a tombstone sealing shut. He decided my miracle wouldn't come from you. Without another word, without a backward glance, Henry placed a supportive arm around Adela's shoulders. He gave Lucas one last, unreadable look, a mix of sorrow for the friend he'd lost and fierce protection for the woman he loved, and then slowly he closed the door. The solid thud of the lock engaging echoed in the quiet street. Lucas was left standing alone, the truth of her words ringing in his ears, a solitary figure swallowed by the consequences of his own betrayal, staring at the closed door that separated him forever from the life he was always meant to have. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.